In a quiet town in America, nestled between rolling hills and vast fields, lived a man named David Carter. David was not just any man, he held the esteemed title of U.S. Attorney General, the highest legal authority in the nation. With a tall, imposing figure and a kind smile, he had a way of making people feel safe and understood. Known for his unwavering commitment to fairness, David spent his days advocating for justice, ensuring that every citizen, regardless of race or background, received equal treatment under the law. But beneath his polished exterior lay a story that few knew, a story filled with struggles, injustices, and a relentless pursuit of change. David grew up in a rough neighborhood, where he often witnessed the deep scars of inequality. As a child, he saw friends and neighbors mistreated simply because of the color of their skin. These experiences ignited a fire within him, compelling him to pursue a career in law. He wanted to be the voice for the voiceless, the defender of the marginalized. After years of hard work and determination, he achieved his dream, becoming the most powerful lawyer in the country. Despite his success, David remained humble. He often returned to his hometown, visiting his mother who still lived in the small house where he grew up. On one particular day, he decided to surprise her. Wearing a simple gray hoodie and jeans, he wanted to blend in, to feel like the son she raised rather than the high-profile attorney general. As he drove down the familiar roads, he felt at peace. The golden sun bathed the countryside in warmth, and he relished the moment, thinking of the apple pie he planned to bring her, her favorite. However, his tranquil drive took an unexpected turn. David noticed a police car parked on the side of the road. Inside sat Officer Mark Jenkins, known in town for his strict demeanor and questionable fairness. There were murmurs among the townspeople that Mark treated individuals differently based on their race. As David passed by, Mark's gaze lingered on the black SUV. Something about David, perhaps his skin color or his confident demeanor, sparked suspicion in Mark's mind. "Who's this guy?" Mark muttered under his breath, his instincts kicking in. Without a moment's hesitation, he decided to follow David. A few minutes later, Mark activated his lights and pulled David over. Surprised but composed, David rolled down his window, expecting a routine stop. "License and registration," Mark barked, his tone aggressive and dismissive. He didn't even bother to meet David's eyes. David handed over his documents, feeling an unsettling tension in the air. "Is there a problem, officer?" he asked, trying to maintain a respectful tone. Mark narrowed his eyes. "Step out of the car," he commanded, his voice leaving no room for negotiation. David felt a wave of unease wash over him. "May I ask why?" he replied, his voice calm but firm. Mark's response was to reach for his gun, the move so sudden that it sent a chill down David's spine. "I said step out of the car," he shouted, his anger palpable. Realizing the gravity of the situation, David slowly opened the door, raising his hands. He understood that any sudden movement could escalate the tension. "Officer, I don't want any trouble. Please check my ID, my name is David Carter," he said gently, trying to defuse the situation. Mark didn't even glance at the ID. "I don't care who you say you are, you look like trouble to me," he snapped, stepping closer, his finger dangerously close to the trigger. David's heart raced, but he fought to remain calm. Just then, an older woman named Mrs. Thompson, who lived nearby, pulled up and recognized David immediately. "David Carter," she exclaimed, stepping out of her car. "Is that you?" Mark turned, confusion etched on his face. "You know this man?" "Of course I do," Mrs. Thompson replied, her voice firm. "He's the U.S. Attorney General. Don't you watch the news?" Mark froze, his hand dropping away from his weapon as the reality of his actions sank in. "Why, you're the Attorney General," he stammered, his face flushing with embarrassment. David nodded, maintaining his composure. "I am," he said, but his heart was heavy with the realization of how easily this situation could have gone wrong. Mark's face turned crimson with shame. He muttered an apology, but David remained silent, turning instead to thank Mrs. Thompson for stepping in. Later that evening, David sat with his mother, recounting the shocking encounter. She shook her head sadly, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "Some things never change," she said, her voice filled with sorrow. "But they can," David replied passionately. "That's why I do what I do, Mom. So one day, no one will have to go through this." The story of David and Officer Mark spread like wildfire, igniting a firestorm of reactions across the town and the country. Many were outraged by Mark's actions, while others expressed disbelief that such a thing could happen to the Attorney General. David, however, chose not to focus on anger or revenge. Instead, he viewed the incident as an opportunity to spark a larger conversation about justice and equality. "I forgive Officer Jenkins," David stated in a press conference, surprising many. "But forgiveness does not mean absolution. We must hold each other accountable. I insist that Officer Jenkins undergo training to understand bias and learn how to treat all individuals fairly." The public response was mixed. Some praised David for his compassion, while others criticized him for not demanding harsher consequences for Mark. But David pressed on, using this moment to advocate for systemic change. He launched initiatives aimed at police reform, emphasizing the importance of training officers to recognize and combat their biases. Weeks turned into months, and David's story became a catalyst for change nationwide. Town hall meetings were held, discussions about race and justice ignited, and communities began to come together in support of one another. David traveled the country, sharing his story and advocating for equality. Meanwhile, Mark Jenkins faced the repercussions of his actions. The training he underwent opened his eyes to the biases he had internalized over the years. He began engaging with the community, listening to their stories, and understanding the impact of his actions. Slowly, he transformed from a figure of fear to one of understanding. In a powerful turn of events, David and Mark eventually met again, this time in a community gathering aimed at fostering dialogue. The tension in the room was palpable as people awaited their interaction. "I was wrong," Mark admitted, his voice trembling. "I let my biases cloud my judgment, and I'm sorry for the pain I caused." David nodded, acknowledging the courage it took for Mark to admit his mistakes. "We all have biases," he replied. "It's how we choose to confront them that defines us." The room erupted in applause, a symbol of hope and healing. David's story, once a tale of injustice, had evolved into a narrative of redemption and transformation. As David continued his fight for justice, he demonstrated that kindness and courage could indeed triumph over fear and hate. His journey reminded everyone that real change often begins with a single moment of understanding and that the path to justice is a collective effort. And that's the story of David Carter, a story of resilience, forgiveness, and the power of one man's resolve to make a difference. If you found inspiration in this tale, share it with others and help spread the message of hope and change.